What's up guys, and welcome back to the DDE F12 insane Gymkhana build. If you guys are new here, this car was a perfectly good running F12 when we decided to completely tear it down and build it into a one-off Ferrari Gymkhana car. V12, twin turbo, 1500 horsepower at the wheels. That's our goal. We'll see if we can get there. We're working hard on those numbers, but as well as everything else on the chassis. Right now, we need to work on the bell housing. So we had Gary from Designcraft Fab make us a billet aluminum plate that's going to adapt our Samsonite transmission onto that bell housing. Before we can do that, we need to line it up perfectly so the input shaft from the transmission meets the crankshaft exactly straight. So we're aiming for getting this within 5/1000ths of an inch. Very, very tight tolerances. We've got the transmission plate tack welded onto it. We've mocked up this stand for the dial indicator. So this is bolted onto the crankshaft. So we're gonna be able to spin the crankshaft. We're looking to make sure that this circle where the transmission locates is exactly in line with the crankshaft. We don't want them to be off at all, because if they are, that transmission input shaft is going to be at an angle the whole time that it's running. The clutch disc might not disengage. We could kill crankshaft bearings. We could kill the input shaft bearings in the transmission as well. It won't shift properly. Just tons of issues can come up from not having this plate on the bell housing perfectly centered. We're gonna start to turn the crankshaft and we're gonna watch this dial indicator as it goes around, see how far off we are.
Ready to spin, are you guys ready?
All right, yeah, come on. Nice and slow. All right, so that was already 7, 8 thousandths. Ooh, 15, 20 thou. Kind of holding right there. We'll get this dial indicator vertical. I'll make a mark here. We'll spin it around again. I'll zero it out when it's vertical, and then we'll start marking on the bell housing and see where it's off, and then see if we can adjust it. Keep going. Another 10 degrees. So we're about plus 28 here. Another quarter turn. So we've got our 4 points here just to start with. So we're negative 35 here, plus 28. So this whole plate is shifted, also shifted the other way. So I'm gonna tap this bottom here and see if we can get it to kind of center up.
All right, so right now he's at about 3.5 thousandths. If you look at the gauge, like it's pretty close. But talking in terms of like scale for this, 3.5 thousandths, a piece of paper right here is about 3.5 thousandths. He even might have to cut that in half. So trying to move it half a piece of paper in order to get that perfectly lined up is pretty nuts.
Ooh. Oof. All right. Okay.
On the money, dog. You see that? Sheesh.
Really acceptable tolerance is 5 thousandths, and we're at half of that basically right now. You also have to pay attention to the bottom here, because this is parallel. We need to make sure that stays parallel with the bottom of the engine so the transmission isn't twisted. I want to make sure that's within like 0.1, 0.2 degrees so the transmission is perfectly flat in the car. It is very time consuming though to get this right. All right, so we got that plate almost perfectly centered. We're just a little bit off, 1.5 to 2 thousandths off. We're off in the direction where we're going to tack weld it right now. So I'm preheating the plate, and we're hoping that when we do that tack weld, it's going to pull that plate over just a touch and will be perfectly centered. That's the goal. I don't know if it's going to happen. If it stays exactly where it is, I'm happy with that. If it pulls slightly and gets us within 1/1000ths, that's amazing. We don't have a very strong TIG welder. Preheating it helps us get a little bit of penetration, be able to weld it a bit better and get a better tack on this. All right, so it's looking really good. The whole thing is less than 3 thousandths off right now, about 2 thousandths, 2.5. Just slightly shifted. So he's welding this upper corner. That's the tightest point. So we're trying to get that plate to shift just a touch up and make it perfect. We're just kind of strategically using those tacks to pull it in the direction that we want. We were successful. We've got the bell housing and the back of the bell housing plate tacked together. We're with 1.5 thousandths of an inch. Pretty much spot on. I don't think even if we sat here all day, we could get it any better than that. I'm happy with how this came out. Before we can put this bell housing transmission onto the engine and get it in the car, we actually have to cut this front cross member. So this section back here is currently hitting on the bottom of the transmission and pushing the transmission up. So it's actually the opposite direction that we want to go. We want to get the transmission level or close to level in the car, but this is stopping us from doing that. We're going to cut this back piece off so that we have the rest of the front cross member. We were able to put that in the car. We've already got these plates made up. We have some parts that we put onto the engine mounts, and that's going to match the original engine mount height. So we're going to put all the suspension back on it, all four corners, get this thing to be a roller. And having it up on the 2-post lift, we can move the car up, we can move the car down, whatever we need to do. Right now, we're gonna chop this, and then we're gonna go upstairs, and we're gonna start grabbing all that suspension down and bring it down here, find all the hardware for all that stuff, bolt everything back together. And it'll be really cool to see this car on the ground again, because it's been a while. Yo, Tim, check this out. Check out what I just filmed. Oh, sick. What's up, guys? We're gonna take a quick break from the video, tell you about the Insta360 and the insane deal they have going on right now for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. We've got the Insta360 X3 here with the selfie stick. We've got a suction mount on the car. Stick it on there and go for a spin. X3's brand new half-inch sensor captures the action in vivid 5.7K 360. Choose your favorite angle after the fact with easy reframing tools and the AI-powered Insta360 app. Shoot first, point later. The invisible selfie stick disappears in your edit, enabling you to capture impossible aerial angles and third-person perspective. Something I really love about the Insta360 camera is you don't need multiple cameras. You don't have to set up the shots before you go out. You just mount the camera. It doesn't matter what direction it's pointing in. You can frame those shots later in the software, and it's super easy to use. You hit the power button, you hit record, and you're good to go. Man, I can't wait to check out those shots when we get back to the shop. I think they're gonna be absolutely stunning. So the Insta360 is so easy to use. For a guy like me who is not into cameras and camera gear and settings, I put it on, I press record, and I get amazing shots. But if you're more into really dialing everything in, it has all those options available too. So you can really get into the nitty-gritty and get exactly what you want. Guys, the holiday season is coming up. Don't miss any of those moments. You need to get an X3. Insta360 is doing their Black Friday Cyber Monday deal that will only be available until December 3rd. Click the link in the description to get 10% off the X3, 30% off the One X2, and 25% off the One RS Twin Edition. Limited offer valid until December 3rd only. All right, guys, don't miss out. How you doing, Dave? Just so you know for next time. If you guys remember, the wheels that were on this car, Dave stole those wheels and put them on his 599, which is still in Canada, so we don't have any wheels to put on this car except for his stock 19-inch wheels off the 599. Now we have 4 tires and 4 wheels. We have the suspension sitting here on the floor. We're gonna bolt all this stuff back up in the car so we can make it roll. Our goal is to get the engine and transmission fitted together, take that whole assembly, drop it into the car, finish the engine mount so we can make the transmission mount. A lot of stuff that we're gonna put together today.
So how they did it at the factory?
Probably. I mean, the Italians love their hammers. It's how they hammer, dog. That's how they assembled the entire car. This thing's gonna be on the ground, on wheels, with the engine and transmission in it. I'm pretty excited about that. Huge step forward.
I am excited to see this car roll around and maybe roll around on the streets. Who knows?
Axles are still connected. We're gonna pull the axles off. We don't have a 42mm socket, so we just threw some zip ties on there to hang the axles up and let them spin inside the zip tie so they're not flopping around on the control arms and just damaging the axle and just making a lot of noise. That'll hold them in place while we roll the car around. I got the flywheel bolted on here. I'm gonna put the clutch assembly together and bolt that on as well. And then I'll be able to measure off of the back of the engine, basically where the bell housing bolts to, and use a straight edge and measure where the clutch pressure plate fingers are. So when it's all bolted together, these fingers will actually get pushed down. So we can't measure it right now, so we'll have to bolt it all together. Check that distance, and then I'll measure the bell housing and the transmission and see what that gap is. And whatever that measurement is how much we can basically fit, what throwout bearing is gonna fit in there. We do need a little bit of gap, like a 3 to 5mm gap between the bearing and this surface. And the reason for that is once these clutch discs start wearing, these fingers will start to come back up. And if you don't have enough clearance here, the bearing will basically be pushing on this the whole time and the clutch will start slipping. You gotta get that measurement right. And that's something I wanna take care of right now. The first time we're putting all this stuff together so we can figure out if we need to make an adapter plate, if the bearing is shorter, whatever it might be. This will give us some heads up of what we need to do. All right, So that's coming together right now. We have the input shaft actually out of the transmission. Samsonis is kind of unique. The input shaft actually comes out of the front of the transmission and it's just held in place by the C-clip here, which makes it really easy to do the clutch alignment. Clutch assembly is all bolted up now. We have one issue though. Right now, the crankshaft is on a couple bearings on the engine. That's fine, but there's no thrust bearings right now. And the thrust bearings stop the crankshaft from moving back and forth. So what I'm gonna do to measure this accurately, I'm gonna push it all the way in, take a measurement, I'm gonna push it all the way out and take a measurement and see what that difference is, divide that by half to know where the center is, and then I'll be able to get an accurate reading. I'm gonna use these straight edges across the front of the pressure plate here, and then see what our distance is to the block, 54 millimeters there. Then I'll measure to the fingers here, so right about 46 millimeters from these pressure plate fingers to the block. Now I'll be able to measure the bell housing and see what that depth is, see what room we have for a throwout bearing. Damn, it's back on the ground. Different perspective seeing it down here on the ground again. I feel like it's been a while. Let's put this thing on the lift. Let's throw an engine and transmission in it, make some mounts. It's starting to look like a car. I'm getting pretty excited about this.
Dude, the first cage I made in Supra, dude, that shit had so much clearance.
So right now we've got a ton of slop because we didn't want to tighten the bolts on the tie rods and pull them all the way in because then it makes it really hard to get them out. So one of the threads on top of the tie rods is cross-threaded at the end. Just kind of tapped them in place, but they have fallen out now. So the wheels aren't moving, but we got a lot of slop. So we're gonna have to take care of that. Yeah, these top threads are just completely destroyed. So we'll either have to cut it off or we can sand it with the little disc sander at an angle and just basically take those threads off of it.
All right, Mike was able to grind down the messed up part of the threads, and now we can put the wheel back on.
This thing is down on the floor. It is rolling. I'm gonna have the guys push me forward. Left. Straight. Right. Well, slow down. Straight. Right. We gotta go back, guys. I don't have any brakes. Right. Where are you going? Go ahead.
I think the car needs a little vitamin D.
What?
Yep. Where are we going, guys?
Left?
Mike, how does it feel to drive this car for the first time?
Well, it doesn't have a lot of power.
Hey, man.
Where are you guys going anyway? Steering's not that responsive right now. I also have zero brakes, so hopefully there's no cars coming around the corner. Are we going all the way around? Back normal. Did you guys tighten all the suspension bolts? Yeah. Yeah.
Most of it.
Yeah. Dude, the alignment's pretty good, actually. Look at that. Drive yourself.
Mike, pull the e-brake.
Whoa. Just taking my Ferrari for a spin. That's a car, bro. Oh, we were gonna put the engine in today, but apparently I've got 2 horsepower back there.
3.
3?
We picked up an extra
Horsepower? Mark. Dude. Mark, cops. He didn't see us.
Well, that's your license.
Rear's feeling a little stiff. Can you give me 2 clicks of low speed?
I got you.
Just on one side, yeah?
There you go.
Get that circle track set up. We've got an electric car too. Doesn't make any noise. After our first spin around the block, we got it on a 2-post lift now. The engine's ready, kind of. We got some straps around it. I think that's the only way that we're gonna be able to lift it up right now. We'll see how that works. Hopefully it won't slide. First thing, we're gonna put the transmission, bell housing, clutch, everything is gonna get bolted together so we have the full assembly. Then we'll put it on a cherry picker and we'll bring it over here, drop it in, and hopefully it won't drop. We'll just put it in, place it in the car where it's supposed to go. no dropping. Whew. Clutch is lined up.
So now we're just gonna jack up the engine. Hopefully it goes in pretty smoothly without having to move too many things around.
Because of the way that we're lifting the engine, let's put an extra strap back here because it's got quite a bit of tilt going on at the moment. Not ideal by any means, but let's see if it works. It's probably not gonna fall.
Probably.
Probably not gonna fall. I mean, it looks pretty sketchy. So far it hasn't slid. So we're gonna put the car up now and put the front cross member in so that when we get the engine in, we're gonna have a place to set the engine down. We're still gonna need a jack or something to hold the transmission in place, but for now, at least we'll have a spot for the engine to drop down.
All right, drop down.
Go in.
Go in.
Okay, hold on. That looks pretty centered for now. The engine is in. It's just sitting there now. Now we have to go through a process of making sure the engine is centered up in the chassis. From what I remember, when we measured it the first time, off of the chassis points to the crankshaft, which usually is dead center, it was offset a little bit. It was not actually in the middle. I'm not sure why they did that. I don't know if it was for clearance for something, or maybe it was just the weight balance. The driver in the car, they moved the engine over to the passenger side slightly to balance it out. But whatever it was, we're gonna put the engine in the middle of the car. Just make sure everything is centered up. That way we know that the drive shaft is gonna be straight. We don't want any angle there. We also wanna make sure that the exhaust is the same on both sides so it looks even. Now that we have the steering shaft in there, looking at how we're gonna have to make the exhaust, the tubes are gonna have to come up pretty fast and come around the steering shaft. When we get to that point, we're gonna do the driver's side first because that's gonna be the more difficult side and that's gonna kind of dictate what this side looks like. But that side is pretty open, so copy it, basically transfer it from this side over. If we made it on this side first and we tried to fit it on that side, then we'd have two completely different looking exhaust manifolds. Lots more work ahead. So we actually got lucky. There were two holes in the transmission tunnel just big enough to slide a ratchet strap through. So we went underneath, put the ratchet strap through, and then back through the other hole. Got a piece of wood there so it doesn't pull on the sheet metal like in those holes and maybe cut it. So we've got that wrapped around there. And then on the bottom of the transmission, it's hooked together. We've got that ratchet locked in place so we can adjust the height of the transmission. Now we can lift the car up in the air, get the under hoist transmission stand in there so we can take the load off it, get the angles exactly right. More? Yep. 0.47. So right now we're trying to figure out the transmission mount, and that is more difficult in this car than any other car that I've worked on because it never really had a transmission in it, a front mounted transmission. So it had the transaxle that was in the back, and in the center of the car here, there are no spots to bolt anything of any sort of weight or strength to. So we're figuring out where we're gonna put it. And I think what we're gonna have to do, there's the box aluminum frame rails that come forward that we've actually chopped into for the seats to mount. But further forward of that, there's a good flat section here. So I think we'll make a steel plate, two nuts that are welded to it, and those will be positioned here, and we'll rivet those plates in place. You can just put bolts in directly from the bottom and thread them in. You don't have to hold a nut on the inside of the car. And then inside of that frame rail, it's just a box aluminum. So I don't want it to crush, so we might actually have to make some aluminum slugs that will go in there, and then we'll weld those so it'll have a very strong mounting point. Obviously the transmission mount on the bottom will have a flat plate as well where the bolts are gonna go through, so that'll be made out of steel. That'll spread the load out a bit, but just for longevity, we'll probably put some aluminum slugs in there as well, just to make sure it doesn't deform or crush at all. Our best option and probably the only option. All right, so we have the engine perfectly centered in the car right now. The transmission is also perfectly centered, so he's gonna start tacking the engine mounts together, help us hold the engine in place, and then we'll come back and double check the engine's still in the middle, the transmission's still in the middle, and if that looks good, put some more tacks on the engine mounts, and then we'll start designing the transmission mount. We've got the engine angle matching the subframe angle, so the engine is perfectly flat. Everything looks good. Now we've taken a bunch of measurements off of the transmission to the chassis so we can start making the transmission mount. Sean's gonna work on drawing that up. I'm just gonna look and see what we need to remove. I think there's a couple riv nuts on the bottom of the chassis that are going to make our mount kind of stand off in a weird way, so we're gonna grind those off, get those out of the way. When he's done with that, drawing the mount, should be able to cut it out and get it put in the car pretty quick.
So while Mike and Sean are in the CAD programming designing the actual mount for the trans, I'm currently getting these nut certs that were in the chassis for like the heat shield out of the way. So this will be all flat. Right now I'm just trying to drill them out. I was able to drill one, but it still needs to be drilled out to a bigger size, but this side is spinning. So I might just grind them and push them through. Easy. Easy.
All right, so we got the 3 pieces for the transmission mount designed. They're gonna be different thicknesses. The bottom plate's gonna be 3/16, and then the front plate and the rear tabs are gonna be at an 1/8 inch. So we're gonna cut out the 3/16 piece first. We'll go put it in the car, make sure it looks good. Cut the 1/8 inch parts out, clean them all up, and then we should be able to tack it together in the car and see exactly where it's gonna go. Then we'll be able to drill the holes through the bottom, through our transmission mounts, up through the floor. And we'll have a trans mount, and the thing will be actually mounted into the car. All right, well, we got a lot accomplished. The engine is in the car. Engine mounts are tacked in place. The trans mount is in and tacked together. We still have some work to do there. We got to make some plates for the side to finish it off. Then we have to drill all the way through the chassis. I just drilled pilot holes. We have to drill all the way through the chassis, and I need to make sure that when I drill through, it's square in both directions and the bolts aren't going to be going one way or the other. Make sure it's straight up and down. Then once we drill through the top and we know where they're going to land exactly, we'll have to make templates for the top, and I think we're going to have to make a run to the parts store, because I think the longest bolts we have are about 50 millimeters in length, and it looks like it's probably a 60 or 70 millimeter bolt that's going to go through there. A couple more hours, and we'll have everything welded up and done. But it is, what is it, midnight or something, Tim? Basically.
It's so dark.
it is dark as hell outside. So we're going to go home, get some rest, and get back at it tomorrow. Oh yeah, listen to that V6 purr. The van, the Carrera van GT, was at my shop for a few days. I went and picked it up this morning, so we have it back. And as I was driving it to the shop this morning, I'm thinking, this thing needs more power. It also needs a transmission that works, but it needs more power. The nitrous kind of bumped it up, but it didn't really make it like crazy fast. And then with this transmission, it's just kind of crap. It just slips. It's like really confused between gears. I was thinking like we should do a turbo kit or something like that, but the transmission is the real weak link. And then I was thinking, I wonder if we could fit like a Huracan motor in this thing and stick a transmission on it, run into the rear diff, and have a V10 Carrera van GT. That'd be pretty sick, I think. It'd be ridiculous. It's dumb, but it's also funny. Imagine the sound coming from the van if it had a V10 in it, with like side pipes on it, like running down each side, like boom tubes, little NASCAR exhaust. That'd be crazy. I think we get in a lot of trouble with this thing though, and it probably costs over $100,000 to do it. I'm gonna talk to Dave, see how much money he has in the bank account, see if we can take it out of his salary. We have our $22 worth of
Jeez.
4 bolts and 4 nuts. When you don't plan ahead, you pay a lot for your hardware. But we got them, we got what we need, so we can actually bolt the transmission in place, then we can lower the car down, we get the wheels back on it, and we'll have an engine and transmission completely mounted in the car. I just got the holes drilled, so this is only gonna be a temporary thing. We're gonna put those long bolts through with the nuts, so then we're actually going to make a metal plate that's gonna drop on the top of that rail, and we're gonna make some steel inserts that are threaded on the inside. So we'll get like a 3/4 inch solid stock, drill it and tap it for our bolts. We'll basically have 2 pins that drop all the way down to the bottom of that square tube so it won't crush, and that way we can have shorter bolts from the bottom. We don't have to come through in here and have these 70 millimeter long bolts. Much cleaner, more proper way to do it. Guys, we have a transmission mount that's all welded up. The engine mounts are in and they're mostly welded up. When we take the engine out later, we'll finish welding them. There's no reason to do that right now, but it's all in there. It is solid. It looks really good. It's dead center in the car. Now we're gonna actually be able to get a measurement off of the transmission, check the angle, and then we'll know what angle we need to put our diff at so they can be perfectly in line. It doesn't matter if they have a step in between them. They can be higher and lower, but you don't want one to have 10 degrees of angle and one to have 4 degrees of angle. The drive shaft is gonna basically flop around. It's not gonna be smooth. So you need to make sure that those are both matching angles, even if the height's different. So we're gonna measure that. Then we can kind of figure out how to mount that diff. That's still gonna be a big challenge. There's a lot of space. The diff is so much smaller than the original transmission that was there. So we're gonna have to figure that out. We have the engine and transmission mounted in the car, and I'm really excited about that. This is a big step forward. We have a lot of the big components in now. We've got the fuel cell, the radiator, engine and trans. Once that diff is securely mounted, that's like the main components. Done. We're moving forward. Still got a lot of work left, but we're coming along, and it is starting to look like a car now. All right, so I'm gonna mock up the shifter linkage just so I can get a length, and then we can make that piece. We've got the strain gauge here. This goes in line in between the shifter and the linkage on the transmission, and it can sense how much you're pulling back on the shifter or pushing forward on the shifter, and basically it's gonna send a signal to the ECU that we're gonna program, and the amount of force that it takes to get that shift done. This will tell the ECU that we're trying to make a shift happen, and then the ECU is going to either cut throttle or cut timing or a combination of both to allow it to be a no lift shift. So we can stay full throttle and just grab the shifter, and the ECU will basically do the rest for us. So it'll engage the gear, but it'll drop the power and then re-engage the power after, and that's all done through this sensor. So pretty cool little deal here. All right, so now that the engine and transmission are mounted completely, we can actually start mocking up the header design. It's gonna be pretty tight, especially with that steering column, steering shaft going through there. It's gonna take a little time to figure it out, but luckily we've got those Lego click together, make your own header kit, which is gonna make this way easier than just trying to figure out what bends to put where, chopping up a bunch of mandrel bent tubes and trying to figure it out that way. So it's gonna be a challenge, but it's gonna be a lot easier than doing it the old school way. So we've got our 6-into-1 collectors that are gonna be on each side of the engine, and I think really the only way to get them in there is to kind of have them around here with a bit of angle, and then we can put a tube after that that's gonna be kind of coming out straight forward. After that, it's gonna have to come down and cross over into an X and then come back up to mount the turbos. And the only reason I'm doing that is for the sound. We could absolutely just have these come out and have the turbos right here, but I think it's gonna sound a lot better with that crossover pipe where we bring all 6 from each side, all 12 will go into basically one tube and then come back apart and go to the twin turbos. So we get that really high pitch V12 sound out of this thing that it was seriously lacking before with the old setup. That's gonna be a big challenge, especially on the driver's side of the car. So getting this collector somewhere around this area, we need it to snake around the steering shaft and come up and be in the right spot and be the correct length. So we need these to all be equal length, ideally. Getting that into there, these tubes are probably gonna have to come up and over and back and then loop around to match the length of this rear one. The rear one, we'll probably start with this one first, bring this one up, basically build it as short as we can to get it into the collector, and then try to match all the other ones. And then there's gonna be some trial and error. This might need to be a little longer just to make the other ones work. This one might have to be shorter. It's gonna be a challenge for sure. But I am really looking forward to using this stuff. I haven't ever done a header with this before, so it's always been a long process. But then again, I've only done Porsche headers, really, 3 on each side. It's a whole lot easier to get them to match up. 6 on each side, that's gonna be a huge challenge. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting pretty excited about this build. Actually seeing the engine and transmission, bell housing is done, the flywheel, the clutch is all mounted up. Like, this thing's turning into a car. It is really coming along. A lot of work to do. We have obviously the headers, the turbos, that'll just finish up the front area here. We have to mount oil coolers. We have to plumb everything. So we have to run lines to the back of the car, to the radiator, bring them up to the front, all the fuel lines, brake lines, drivetrains. We have to build suspension for this thing. There's a ton of work left. But thank you guys again for watching our long journey with this car. This is a crazy project. I hope you guys enjoy it. Subscribe, like, help us out. Tell your friends to watch the videos too. It looks like a car now. I'm pretty pumped. Tim, what do you think?
I'm excited.
Pretty hyped on that?